Picture a woman who hasn't been touched in 2 years, pulling up to a mountain cabin in a blizzard with a sleeping 4-year-old in the back seat. She's running on gas station coffee and the grim belief that being a good mother means never wanting anything for herself. She walks through the door. A man the size of a door frame is standing shirtless in the kitchen. He owns the place. The booking platform's screwed up, the roads are closing, and her daughter is going to wake up in the morning, walk into this stranger's kitchen, see his dog, and say one word that rearranges everything. Puppy! Wrong cabin, right daddy. Isla Wilde. Single mom, grumpy mountain man, snowed in forced proximity. 5-pepper heat that builds slow and detonates hard. Chapter 1. Wrong cabin.
The GPS had died somewhere around mile marker 47, which felt about right for the kind of week Emma Carter was having. She white-knuckled the steering wheel and leaned forward, squinting through the windshield at a world that had gone completely, aggressively white. The wipers were losing their war against the snow. The headlights carved maybe 15 feet of visibility into the mountain dark before giving up and letting the blizzard win. In the back seat, Lily slept like the dead. Arms thrown wide in her car seat, mouth open, Mr. Bunny clutched in one fist with the kind of grip that suggested even unconscious 4-year-olds understood the fundamental uncertainty of the universe. She'd been out since the last gas station, 3 hours and 1 lifetime ago, when Emma had bought the world's worst coffee and a bag of animal crackers, and stared at the bathroom mirror under fluorescent lights and thought, "This is fine. We're doing great. Everything is fine." Everything was not fine. The rental confirmation on her phone said the cabin was at the end of Timber Ridge Road. The problem was that Timber Ridge Road looked exactly like every other snow-covered mountain road she'd been on for the last hour, which was to say it looked like a vague suggestion between trees. She'd passed the same bent mailbox twice. Or maybe it was a different, bent mailbox. Hard to say when the world was a snow globe that God had shaken and then forgotten about. "Okay," she muttered to nobody. Okay. She said okay a lot these days. It was her mantra, her prayer, her white flag dressed up as a battle cry. Okay when the landlord raised the rent. Okay when her client sent 17 revision requests at 11 p.m. on a Friday. Okay when Lily asked where Daddy was, and Emma had to explain again that Daddy lived somewhere else now, in a way that didn't include the words because Daddy decided being a father was less fun than being 26 and single in Austin. Okay. She could do this. She'd driven 6 hours through a worsening storm with a sleeping child, and a car that made a concerning noise above 50 miles per hour. She could find a goddamn cabin. The trees opened up. The headlights caught a structure, wood, stone, warm light glowing from behind curtained windows. A porch. A chimney leaking smoke into the storm. The number on the mailbox matched the one in her confirmation email. Oh, thank God. She exhaled so hard her lungs ached. Oh, thank God. She pulled up as close to the porch as she could manage, killed the engine, and sat for a moment in the sudden silence. The snow ticked against the roof. The engine made its concerning noise one more time, then stopped. Lily snored softly. Emma pressed her forehead to the steering wheel and gave herself 5 seconds of wanting to cry. Not out of sadness. Out of the specific, bone-deep exhaustion of being the only person in charge of everything, all the time with no one to hand it to. 5 seconds. That was the rule. 5 seconds to feel it, then move. She lifted her head. Wiped her eyes. Checked the lockbox code in her email, 7734, and got out of the car. The cold hit her like a slap. Not the kind of cold she was used to back home, the damp, annoying cold of a mid-Atlantic January. This was mountain cold. Serious cold. The kind that crawled inside your coat and made itself comfortable and reminded you that nature didn't care about your plans. She grabbed the 2 duffel bags from the trunk, everything she'd packed for a week, because traveling light was a skill single mothers developed out of pure survival, and hauled them up the porch steps. The wood was solid under her boots. The porch light was off, but the glow from inside was enough to find the lockbox mounted beside the door. 7734. It opened. The key was inside. She unlocked the door, pushed it open, and stepped into warmth. The relief was physical. Heat. A fire, an actual fire crackling in a stone fireplace in the main room. The smell of cedar and coffee and something else, something smoky and human and lived in that didn't quite match the sterile photos on the rental listing. She dropped the bags, straightened up, looked around, and froze. There was a man standing in the kitchen. A very large man. A very large, shirtless man holding a coffee mug, staring at her with an expression that suggested she had about 4 seconds to explain herself before things went badly. Emma's brain did several things at once. It registered the size of him. Tall, really tall, wide through the shoulders and chest in a way that had nothing to do with a gym, and everything to do with the kind of body that came from hauling things and building things, and being fundamentally, structurally big. It registered the beard, dark and close-trimmed, framing a jaw that could have been carved from the same stone as the fireplace. It registered the chest, broad, dusted with dark hair, a scar running along one side of his ribs that looked like a story she didn't want to hear at this particular moment. And then her brain registered the most important thing, which was that he was looking at her, the way a bear looked at someone who'd wandered into its den. Which was unfortunately apt, because he was the most bear-like human being she had ever seen. "Who the hell are you?" His voice matched the rest of him. Low. Rough. The auditory equivalent of gravel under truck tires. Emma's hand was still on the doorknob. "I'm Emma Carter. I have a reservation." "You have a what?" "A reservation. A booking. For this cabin. Through Mountain Stay." She fumbled for her phone with numb fingers, pulled up the confirmation email, and held it out like a shield. "See? Timber Ridge Cabin, 7 nights, check in today. I have a confirmation number, and everything." He didn't take the phone. He set his mug down on the counter with a deliberate click and crossed his arms over his bare chest, which did absolutely nothing to make him look smaller or less intimidating, and quite a lot to make his forearms do a thing that Emma's hindbrain catalogued against her will. "This is my cabin," he said. "I own it." "Okay, well, Mountain Stay says it's mine for the next 7 days, so." "Mountain Stay is wrong. That's not really how reservations work." His eyes narrowed. They were dark, brown maybe, or some deep hazel that the firelight couldn't quite decode. He had the kind of face that probably hadn't smiled since the previous administration. "Lady, I don't care how reservations work. I live here. This is my house. I blocked off this week on the platform 3 months ago." "Well, it wasn't blocked when I booked it 2 weeks ago." They stared at each other. The fire crackled. Somewhere outside, the wind threw a fistful of snow against the window like a reminder that the universe had a sense of humor, and it was mean. Emma felt the fight drain out of her. Not because he was wrong, he might not be, but because she had been driving for 6 hours and she hadn't eaten since the animal crackers, and her daughter was asleep in the car in a blizzard, and if this man kicked her out, she had literally nowhere to go. "Look," she said, and hated the way her voice cracked. "I know this isn't, I understand this is your home. I'm not trying to," she stopped. Swallowed. Pulled herself back from the edge of the kind of public breakdown she could not afford. "My daughter is asleep in the car. She's 4. The roads are closing, and I don't have GPS, and I don't know where the nearest, I just need." She trailed off because she didn't know how to finish that sentence. "I just need a place to sleep. I just need one thing to go right. I just need to stop being so goddamn tired." Something shifted behind his eyes. It was subtle, a flicker, there and gone, but it changed the temperature of the room by several degrees. "Your kid's in the car." The gravel in his voice was different now. Not softer exactly. Just pointed at something other than her. "She's asleep." She's safe, the car's right outside, I can see it from. He was already moving. Past her through the door, onto the porch. She watched, stunned, as this enormous barefoot man walked into a blizzard without a coat, and peered through the backseat window of her car at a sleeping 4-year-old like he was running a safety inspection. He came back inside, snow on his shoulders, feet probably frozen, and said, "Guest wings through the hall on the left. 2 rooms, 1 bathroom. Sheets are clean." Emma blinked. What? The guest wing. Where you and the kid are sleeping. Tonight. He said it like the words cost him money. "We'll sort out the platform in the morning. I can pay, the booking rate, whatever." "We'll sort it in the morning," he repeated, and the way he said it made it clear this was not a negotiation, it was a ceasefire, and she should take it before he changed his mind. She took it. "Thank you," she said. "Seriously? Thank? Get the kid. I'll bring your bags." He grabbed both duffel bags with one hand like they weighed nothing, and disappeared down the hallway before she could say another word. Emma stood in the entryway of a stranger's cabin, her coat still on, her hands still shaking from the cold and the driving and the adrenaline, and thought, what the hell just happened? She went to get Lily. The transition from car to cabin was one she'd perfected over years of late-night Target runs, and pediatrician visits, and every other small emergency that required carrying a sleeping child through the cold without waking her. Lily was warm and heavy in her arms, face smushed against Emma's shoulder, Mr. Bunny dangling from one fist. She smelled like animal crackers and baby shampoo and something sweet that was just Lily, and the smell of her daughter in her arms steadied something in Emma that had been vibrating at a dangerous frequency for hours. The guest wing was nicer than she'd expected. 2 bedrooms, one with a queen, one smaller with a twin, separated by a bathroom with a clawfoot tub that almost made her moan out loud. The sheets were as promised, clean. The quilt on the bed was thick and soft, and the kind of handmade that suggested someone's grandmother had opinions about thread count. She laid Lily in the center of the queen bed, tucked Mr. Bunny against her chest, pulled the quilt up. Lily sighed and rolled onto her side and didn't wake up. Emma brushed the hair off her daughter's forehead and felt the same thing she always felt, a love so big it was indistinguishable from terror. "I'm doing this for you," she thought. "All of it. Even the parts that feel like they're killing me." She straightened up, pulled off her coat, found her phone and texted her mom, "Made it. Cabin is beautiful. Going to sleep. Love you." All of that was technically true, except the part where the cabin was double booked and a shirtless lumberjack man had looked at her like she was an invading army. But her mother didn't need to know that. Her mother needed to know that Emma had things under control, because that was Emma's job, to have things under control, to be the capable one, to hold the line no matter what the line was. She changed into a sleep shirt in the bathroom, washed her face, brushed her teeth, looked at herself in the mirror, dark circles, messy ponytail, the kind of tired that no amount of concealer could address, and said quietly to her reflection, "You're fine. You're here. It's 1 week. You can do anything for 1 week." She turned off the bathroom light, padded back to the bedroom, slipped under the quilt beside Lily, who immediately rolled toward her warmth without waking, one small hand finding Emma's arm with unerring, unconscious precision. The cabin was quiet. The storm pressed against the windows. The fire was a low murmur through the walls. And on the other side of those walls, she could hear him moving. Heavy footsteps, muffled but present. The creak of a floorboard. The sound of a faucet. The click of a light switch. He was right there, separated by a hallway, and a door, and however many inches of mountain cabin wall. A stranger. A very large, very gruff, very not wearing a shirt stranger who had looked at her like she was a problem, and then carried her bags like they were nothing, and checked on her daughter in the car before he even thought about it. Emma stared at the ceiling. Her body was exhausted, but her brain was doing that thing it did, running laps, cataloging, refusing to shut down. She could still feel the cold of the porch on her skin. Still smell the coffee and cedar from his kitchen. Still see the way his arms had looked when he'd crossed them, the way the firelight had played off the planes of his chest, the way his eyes had changed just barely, just for a second, when she'd said, "My daughter is in the car." She closed her eyes. Took a breath. Let it out. Stop it, she told herself. He's a stranger. He doesn't want you here. This is not a story. This is a logistics problem. But her body, her stupid, touch-starved, sleep-deprived body, didn't care about logistics. Her body cared that there was a man on the other side of the wall, and she could hear him breathing almost if she listened, and it had been so long since she'd been aware of a man's proximity as anything other than a threat or an inconvenience that the simple fact of it, he's there, he's close, he's real, made her chest tight in a way she didn't have the energy to examine. She was here for rest. For Lily. For 1 week of not being responsible for the entire structural integrity of their lives. She was not here for whatever her body thought it was doing. The footsteps stopped. The cabin settled into silence. The storm wrapped itself around the building like a fist. Emma pressed her face into the pillow, pulled Lily closer, and willed herself to sleep. It didn't come quickly. Chapter 2. Ground Rules. Bear hadn't slept. This wasn't unusual. He hadn't slept well in 3 years, not since Claire left, not since he'd traded the apartment in Denver for 40 acres of mountain silence and a dog who snored louder than any human he'd ever shared a bed with. He was used to lying awake, listening to the cabin settle around him, running through the next day's project list, until his brain finally gave up and let him have 4 or 5 hours of something that resembled rest. But this was different. This wasn't his standard issue insomnia, the kind he'd made peace with the way you made peace with a bad knee or a slow internet connection. This was the specific, irritating alertness of knowing there were people on the other side of his wall. People. In his cabin. A woman and a child in his guest wing, sleeping in his sheets, breathing his air. He could hear them, or he imagined he could. The soft murmur of a 4-year-old shifting in sleep. The creak of the bed frame as the woman, Emma, turned over. He lay on his back in the dark and stared at the ceiling, and Rex lay on the floor beside the bed, and neither of them slept. At 5:30 he gave up. Got dressed, flannel shirt this time, because he wasn't making that mistake again. The look on her face when she'd walked into his kitchen and found him shirtless had been something. Surprise mostly. Fear underneath. And then, just for a half second before she'd started talking, something else. Something her eyes had done that tracked down his chest, before snapping back to his face like she'd touched a hot stove. He wasn't thinking about that. He made coffee. Strong black, the way he liked it, the way Claire had always said would kill him, as if caring about his cardiovascular health was something she was still entitled to after she'd moved to Portland with a guy who did hot yoga and called his feelings textures. He stood at the counter and drank it, and watched the snow pile up outside the kitchen window, and calculated how long before the roads were impassable. Not long. Another 6 hours, maybe. The county plow wouldn't make it up here until the storm broke, and the forecast, the last one he'd been able to load before the internet slowed to a crawl, said 3 more days of this, minimum. 3 days. With a woman and a kid in his house. He refilled his mug and started pulling things out of the fridge. Eggs. Butter. The buttermilk he'd picked up in town 2 days ago, because he'd planned to make pancakes for himself this week, alone in the quiet of his own kitchen, like a normal person who'd constructed his entire life around the principle of not having anyone else in it. Rex lifted his head from his paws and made a sound, not a bark, not a whine, something in between. His ears swiveled toward the hallway. Bear heard it a second later. Small feet on hardwood. The whisper slap of bare soles on the floor coming closer. He turned around just as the kid appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was tiny. He'd known she was small, he'd seen her through the car window last night, a lumped shape in a car seat, but standing upright she was tiny. Barely taller than his knee. Wild brown hair that looked like it had fought the pillow and won. Huge eyes dark like her mother's, taking in the kitchen with the systematic intensity of a field researcher encountering a new species. She was wearing pajamas with dinosaurs on them, and holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear. They stared at each other. "Hi," she said. Just like that. No fear, no hesitation. Like walking into a stranger's kitchen at dawn was something she did every Tuesday. "Hi," Bear said. Rex, the trader, chose this moment to abandon all pretense of being a guard dog. He hauled himself off the floor, trotted across the kitchen, and shoved his nose directly into the kid's chest, tail wagging with a full-body enthusiasm that Bear hadn't seen from him since the FedEx driver had accidentally left a box of dog treats on the porch. The kid's face split into a grin so wide it rearranged her entire skull. "Puppy." She dropped the rabbit. Both hands went into Rex's fur. Rex, a 100-pound mutt who could clear a kitchen counter with his tail and had once eaten an entire boot, collapsed onto the floor and rolled onto his back like he'd been shot, presenting his belly for inspection with the desperate enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting his whole life for a 4-year-old to scratch it. Bear watched this betrayal unfold and felt something in his chest do a thing he immediately decided to ignore. "What's his name?" the kid asked, already on the floor with Rex, both of them a pile of limbs and fur and joy. "Rex? Like a dinosaur." "Like a yeah. I guess. Like a dinosaur. I like dinosaurs." She said it like she was confiding state secrets. "I like T-Rexes the best because they have little arms, and that's funny." Bear had no idea what to do with this information. He stood in his kitchen holding a coffee mug, watching a 4-year-old give his dog a belly rub, and realized he was entirely unequipped for this interaction. He dealt in wood and measurements, and the occasional polite exchange with the woman at the hardware store. He did not deal in tiny humans who appeared in his kitchen at dawn and had opinions about dinosaur arms. "Are you hungry?" he heard himself ask, which was a surprise because he hadn't planned to say that. He'd planned to say something along the lines of, "Your mom is down the hall, go find her," but apparently his mouth had made other arrangements. "Yes." She didn't look up from Rex. "Can Rex have a pancake too?" "Rex doesn't eat pancakes." "Why not?" "Because he's a dog. Dogs eat everything. My friend Marco's dog ate a shoe." Bear opened his mouth, closed it, turned back to the counter, started mixing batter. He was making pancakes for a stranger's kid. At 6 in the morning. In his own kitchen that was supposed to be his kitchen, in his cabin that was supposed to be his cabin, during a week that was supposed to be his week. He cracked eggs into the bowl, harder than necessary. The kid, Lily, her mother had said her name was Lily, kept up a running commentary from the floor, directed at Rex, who was receiving it with the solemn attention of a priest hearing confession. She told Rex about the car ride, about the snow, about how her mom had said a bad word when the GPS stopped working and then said, "Sorry, baby, Mama shouldn't have said that," about how Mr. Bunny, the rabbit apparently, didn't like the cold because he was from Africa. "Rabbits aren't from Africa," Bear said before he could stop himself. "Mr. Bunny is," Lily said with the absolute certainty of someone who had never been wrong about anything in her life. He flipped a pancake. Fair enough. He was sliding the third one onto a plate when he heard it, a different set of footsteps in the hallway. Faster. Urgent. The sound of a mother who'd woken up and found an empty bed. "Lily! Lily!" Emma came around the corner at a near run and stopped dead when she saw her daughter on the kitchen floor with Rex, covered in dog hair and grinning. "Hi, Mama. This is Rex. He's a dinosaur." "He's a dog," Bear said. "He's a dinosaur," Lily repeated with a look that dared him to argue. Bear didn't argue. He was learning. Emma stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, breathing like she'd sprinted the length of the hallway. Which she probably had. She was wearing the sleep shirt from last night, thin gray, falling to mid-thigh, and her hair was a wreck and her face was creased from the pillow, and she was looking at him with an expression that was some combination of mortified, grateful, and halfway to tears. She was also, in the sharp morning light from the kitchen window, significantly more attractive than he'd registered last night when she'd been bundled in a winter coat and vibrating with exhaustion. The sleep shirt wasn't doing much in the way of concealment. He could see the shape of her underneath it, the curve of her waist, the swell of her hips, the suggestion of breasts that the thin cotton outlined more than covered. Her legs were bare from mid-thigh down, pale, the muscles in her calves defined in a way that said she spent a lot of time on her feet. He looked away. Focused on the pancakes. Aggressively focused on the pancakes. "I'm so sorry," she said. "She doesn't usually. I mean, she wanders, but I didn't think she'd." "She's fine." He slid the plate across the counter. "Pancakes." Emma blinked at the plate. Then at him. Then at Lily, who was now lying fully on top of Rex like he was a 70-pound body pillow. Then back at the plate. "You made her pancakes?" "I made me pancakes. She was here. There's extra." That was a lie. He'd made the extra on purpose. He was choosing not to think about why. Emma crossed the kitchen. She moved carefully, like she was aware of how much space she took up relative to how much space he took up, which was a lot. The kitchen wasn't small, but he was big enough to make most rooms feel crowded, and with her in here too, barefoot, sleep-warm, smelling like something floral and soft that didn't belong in his cedar and coffee cabin, the square footage seemed to shrink. She took the plate. Their fingers didn't touch, but they came close enough that he felt the warmth of her hand near his, and he pulled back faster than the situation required. "Thank you," she said. Quiet. Sincere. Like he'd done something remarkable instead of just made breakfast. The gratitude bothered him. Not because it was unwelcome, but because of what it implied, that she was so used to doing everything alone that a plate of pancakes from a stranger felt like a gift. That bothered him in a way he wasn't prepared to examine at 6:15 in the morning. "Coffee's on the counter," he said, turning back to the stove. "Mugs are above the sink." She poured herself a cup. Added milk from the fridge without asking, which should have annoyed him. It was his fridge, his milk, but didn't. She sat at the kitchen table and cut Lily's pancakes into small pieces and poured too much syrup because Lily directed the operation with the authority of a tiny air traffic controller. Bear leaned against the counter and drank his coffee and watched this happen in his kitchen, and felt the specific discomfort of a man whose solitude was being eroded from the inside. After breakfast, after Lily had eaten 3 pancakes and fed Rex a piece of bacon she'd somehow conjured from pure willpower and Bear's inability to say no to a 4-year-old, he made the call. Mountain Stay's customer service line rang 11 times before a human picked up. The human was a guy named Tyler, who sounded 22 and deeply uninterested in Bear's problem. Bear explained the situation: his cabin, his block dates, the double booking, the woman and child currently occupying his guest wing, in the tone of a man exercising significant restraint. Tyler put him on hold for 9 minutes. Came back? Said the system showed an active booking for Emma Carter, 7 nights paid in full. Said he was escalating the issue, and someone would circle back within 72 hours. Bear hung up before he said something that would get him banned from the platform. "The roads," Emma said from the table. She'd been watching him during the call, her coffee mug held in both hands, knuckles white. Is there somewhere else I could?" "I checked the dot alerts this morning. Highway 9 is closed. County roads not plowed. Even if there was somewhere else, you couldn't get to it." She absorbed this. He watched her face cycle through several emotions: frustration, embarrassment, the thin edge of panic, before it settled into something that looked a lot like the resigned competence of a woman who was used to situations being worse than expected. "Okay," she said. "So? What do we do?" He looked at her. Looked at Lily, who was on the floor again with Rex, explaining to the dog that Africa was very far away, and that's why Mr. Bunny was cold. Looked back at Emma. He was going to regret this. "Guest wing is yours," he said. "Until the road's clear. Could be 3 days, could be a week. I can't just..." "Kitchen's shared. I eat at 7 and 6. You can eat when you want, but the stove's mine at those times. I work in my shop during the day. It's behind the cabin. Don't come in there unless something's on fire." He ticked the items off like he was reading a lease agreement, which in a sense he was. Wi-Fi passwords on the router. It's slow when the storm's bad. Washer and dryer are in the hall closet. Firewood stacked on the side porch. If you need a fire in the guest wing, I'll bring it. Don't try to carry it yourself, you'll throw out your back. She opened her mouth. "I'm not a babysitter," he said. This one was important. He looked at Lily. The kid was whispering secrets into Rex's ear, and Rex was receiving them with the gravity they deserved. "She seems like a good kid. But she's yours." "I'm not. I don't do kids." Lily looked up at him. "Rex does kids," she said. "Rex is my best friend." "You've known him for an hour," Bear said. "That's enough," Lily said. He stared at her. She stared back, utterly unintimidated, and he had the sudden disorienting thought that this 4-year-old might be the most formidable person he'd met in years. He looked at Emma. "Those are the terms." She nodded. There was something in her expression he couldn't read, relief yes, but also something sharper, something assessing. She was looking at him, the way you looked at a structure when you were trying to figure out if it was sound. Load-bearing walls, foundation, the places where the strain showed. "Those are more than fair," she said. "I'll stay out of your way. You won't even know we're here." That, he already knew, was going to be a lie. She stood to take the plates to the sink. He moved to refill his coffee at the same time. The kitchen was not small, but their paths intersected, a geometry problem neither had calculated correctly, and for a second they were close. Too close. He could see the sleep crease on her cheek, the dark fan of her lashes, the pulse point in her throat jumping at a speed that didn't match her calm expression. She smelled like his soap. She must have used what was in the guest bathroom, his soap, the cedar and pine bar he ordered from a guy in Montana. On his skin it smelled like the forest. On hers, it smelled like something he needed to stop thinking about immediately. "Sorry," she said, stepping sideways. "Small kitchen." "It's not small." "It is with you in it." The words landed between them, and her face did something, a flash of color across her cheeks, a micro-widening of her eyes, that said she'd heard how it sounded a beat after she'd said it. "I just mean the proportions are," she closed her eyes. "I'm going to stop talking now." "Probably wise," he said, but something at the corner of his mouth moved, and she caught it before he could kill it. She went back to the guest wing after that, carrying Lily on one hip and the stuffed rabbit in her free hand. Lily waved at Rex over Emma's shoulder. Rex whined and put his chin on his paws and stared at the hallway after they'd gone. "Don't," Bear said to the dog. Rex looked at him. "She's here because of a booking error. She'll be gone when the road's open. Don't get attached." Rex sighed the long philosophical sigh of a dog who'd seen this kind of denial before and walked back to his bed by the fireplace. Bear washed the dishes, wiped the counter, picked up the piece of bacon Rex had missed under the table, stood in the middle of his kitchen and listened to the muffled sounds of a woman and a child settling into the guest wing, footsteps, a drawer opening, Lily's voice rising in the particular tone of a kid asking about breakfast despite having already eaten breakfast, and felt the specific unwelcome sensation of his house becoming something it hadn't been in a long time. Full. He dried his hands, put on his boots, whistled for Rex, who pretended not to hear him because Rex was apparently staging a one-dog protest against the guest wing door. Bear whistled again, sharper, and Rex came, reluctantly, his whole body language communicating that this was a grave tactical error. They went to the workshop. Bear had a commission to finish, a set of bookshelves for a couple in Bozeman who had specific opinions about dovetail joints. He clamped a board into the vise and started planing, the rhythm of it, push-pull, the curl of wood shaving lifting from the surface, settling something in him that the morning had unsettled. He thought about the way she'd said it is, with you in it. The color in her cheeks. The way her throat had worked when she'd swallowed. He planed harder. He thought about her hands. Small. No ring. Not even a tan line where one used to be. A woman who hadn't been claimed in a long time, or who'd never been claimed the way it counted. He was not thinking about that. Push. Pull. Curl. The wood grain was tight and even, and the edge of the blade was right, and outside the workshop the snow was still falling, and his house had people in it for the first time in 3 years, and one of those people was a woman who smelled like his soap, and the other was a kid who declared his dog her best friend within an hour of meeting him, and none of this was his problem. None of it. Rex, lying in the corner of the workshop, lifted his head toward the cabin and whined. "Shut up," Bear said. Rex put his head back down. Bear kept planing. The wood gave up its shape one thin layer at a time, and the morning went on, and the storm didn't stop, and he didn't think about her hands or her throat, or the way she'd said okay like it was the only word holding her together. He didn't think about it at all. Chapter 3. Day 2. By the second morning, Emma had established a routine, because establishing routines was what Emma Carter did when the ground shifted under her feet. It was her superpower and her sickness, the compulsive need to impose order on chaos, to build a scaffolding of normalcy around whatever disaster she'd wandered into. The routine went like this: wake at 6. Lie still for 30 seconds and remember where she was. Feel the unfamiliar weight of the quilt, the unfamiliar smell of cedar and cold air, the unfamiliar awareness of a man existing on the other side of the wall. Push that awareness down. Get up. Get Lily up. Bathroom. Teeth. Dressed. Kitchen. Bear was always already there. Coffee made, mug in hand, leaning against the counter like a flannel-wrapped monolith. He grunted a greeting that might have been morning, or might have been, "You're still here." Hard to tell. She chose to interpret it as the former. Lily had no such interpretive challenges. Lily treated Bear's kitchen like her personal kingdom, and Rex like her appointed knight. She'd barrel in, hit the floor, and be buried in dog within seconds, narrating the entire experience at a volume that suggested she believed Rex was hard of hearing. Bear watched this with an expression Emma was starting to recognize, the particular face of a man who did not know what to do with a child's uncomplicated love, and was irritated by how much it affected him. He'd made oatmeal this morning. 2 bowls on the counter. One large, one small. The small one had a banana sliced on top in careful, even rounds. "You didn't have to do that," Emma said. "Didn't do it for you." He nodded at Lily. "She told me yesterday she likes bananas. She tells everyone she likes bananas. She told the gas station attendant in Pennsylvania. She told a woman in a parking lot. Sounds like she knows what she wants. She's 4. She thinks she wants to marry Rex. Rex could do worse." Emma looked at him. He was staring into his coffee, but the corner of his mouth had that almost twitch again, the one she'd caught yesterday, the ghost of a smile that he killed before it could fully form. She was developing an unhealthy fixation on that almost twitch. She wanted to see what his face looked like when it actually committed to the expression. She suspected it would be devastating. She took the oatmeal. Ate at the table with Lily. Bear ate at the counter, because apparently sitting at a table with other humans was a bridge too far. After breakfast, she retreated to the guest wing to work. Work. The word felt absurd here, in a cabin on a mountain in a snowstorm, but Rent didn't pause for booking errors and blizzards. She had 3 clients, a real estate agency in Maryland that needed social media management, an online wellness brand that needed email copy, and a personal injury lawyer named Darlene who needed everything, all the time immediately, and treated every request like Emma was a surgeon being paged to the ER. Darlene had sent 4 emails overnight. The subject lines read, in order, urgent, very urgent, please respond ASAP, and where are you? Emma opened her laptop, connected to the Wi-Fi, and watched the browser spin. And spin. And spin. The page loaded in geological layers. Text first, then images trickling in 1 pixel at a time, like a photograph developing in a darkroom operated by someone who'd been drinking. She refreshed. Spun. Trickled. Died. She tried again. The Wi-Fi signal was 1 bar. Less than 1 bar. A theoretical bar. A bar that existed in concept but not in practice, like a balanced work-life equation or a man who texted back on time. Come on, she muttered, refreshing again. The email loaded halfway. She could see Darlene's latest subject line, hello, but not the body, and then the connection dropped entirely. She was drafting a strongly worded internal monologue about the fundamental injustice of trying to maintain a career from inside a snow globe when she heard the footsteps. Heavy. Deliberate. Coming down the hall. Bear appeared in the doorway of the guest room. He took up most of it. He was wearing a different flannel today, green, rolled to the elbows, the fabric straining across his shoulders in a way that suggested he'd either bought it before his most recent growth spurt, or he was philosophically opposed to shirts that fit. His forearms were, okay, she needed to stop noticing his forearms. They were forearms. Everyone had them. His just happened to be thick and corded and dusted with dark hair, and attached to hands that were the approximate size of dinner plates. Normal, unremarkable forearms that she absolutely did not have opinions about. Router needs resetting, he said. I'm sorry. The internet. It drops when the storm messes with the signal. You have to hard reset the router. He was already moving past her, into the room, his room, the guest room that was technically his because everything here was technically his, and crouching behind the small desk in the corner where a router blinked sadly. He was close. The room wasn't large, and he was large, and the math was not in her favor. She could smell him, sawdust and pine and the clean, cold scent of someone who'd already been outside this morning. His shirt pulled tight across his back when he reached behind the router, and she could see the muscles shift underneath it, the landscape of his shoulders moving under flannel like tectonic plates. She was staring. She was absolutely staring. She dragged her eyes to her laptop screen and pretended to read Darlene's half-loaded email with the intense focus of a scholar deciphering ancient text. There. He straightened up. Give it 30 seconds. She counted to 30 in her head. The Wi-Fi icon blinked, strengthened, and the emails cascaded in like a dam breaking. Darlene. 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 The real estate agency asking about a March newsletter. The wellness brand requesting more alignment-forward language in their copy, whatever the hell that meant. Thank you, she said. You didn't have to. You said you work remote. Can't work if you can't connect. He said it like it was obvious. Like noticing her problem and fixing it without being asked was the most unremarkable thing in the world. Like it didn't make her chest ache in a way she was completely unprepared for. If it drops again, just unplug the black cable, wait 10 seconds, plug it back in. Got it. He nodded. Turned to leave. Paused in the doorway. The kid's been standing outside the workshop for 10 minutes, he said without looking at her. I think she wants to see Rex. Oh God, I'll come get her. I didn't say it was a problem. He paused again. I said she was standing there. And then he was gone, his footsteps retreating down the hall, and Emma sat on the bed with her laptop and her 16 unread emails, and a feeling in her sternum that she was not going to name, because naming it would make it real, and she was not in the business of making things real anymore. She worked for 3 hours. The Wi-Fi held. Darlene got her responses. The wellness brand got their alignment-forward copy, whatever that meant. The real estate agency got a newsletter draft. Emma worked with the focused efficiency of a woman who knew that her ability to pay rent depended on her ability to pretend she was sitting in a normal office and not in a mountain cabin belonging to a man whose forearms she had developed an involuntary cataloging system for. Lily was outside. Emma could hear her through the window, the high, bright sound of a 4-year-old in snow, punctuated by Rex's bark, and occasionally, the low rumble of Bear's voice saying something she couldn't quite make out. At noon she closed her laptop and went to the window. And her hand went to her mouth. Bear was in the yard with Lily. They were building a snowman. Or rather, Lily was building a snowman, a small, chaotic, structurally unsound lump of snow that leaned aggressively to the left, and Bear was building a snowman. A proper one. 3 tiers, packed solid, tall enough that the top ball was level with Lily's head. He was shaping it with his bare hands, his fingers red from the cold, pressing and smoothing with the same careful precision she imagined he used on his woodwork. Lily was directing the operation. Emma couldn't hear the specifics, but she could see the gestures, little arms waving, pointing, the full-body expressiveness of a child who had opinions about snowman architecture. Bear was listening. Actually listening, his head tilted down toward her, nodding at intervals, adjusting his work based on her instructions. He was on his knees in the snow to be closer to her height. This man, this enormous, gruff, solitary man who told her "I don't do kids," was on his knees in the snow so a 4-year-old could see what he was building without having to crane her neck. Something cracked in Emma's chest. Not broke, cracked. The way a frozen lake cracks in spring, a sound that means the thaw is coming whether you're ready or not. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and watched Bear lift Lily so she could put a pinecone nose on the snowman's face. Lily shrieked with delight. Rex barked. Bear set her down and stepped back, and Lily grabbed his hand, just grabbed it, both of her small hands around 2 of his fingers, and looked up at him with an expression of such pure, uncomplicated adoration that Emma had to turn away from the window because her eyes were doing something she couldn't afford. "Don't," she told herself. "Don't you dare." She went back to work. She did not go back to the window. She answered emails and wrote copy and invoiced a client and pretended that her hands weren't shaking and that the image of Bear on his knees in the snow wasn't seared into the back of her eyelids like a brand. Evening came the way evenings come in mountain cabins during snowstorms, suddenly, completely, the world outside going from white to gray to black in what felt like 15 minutes. The windows turned into mirrors. The fire Bear had built in the main room crackled and popped and threw shadows that danced across the log walls. Lily was exhausted. The snow, the snowman, an afternoon of Rex-related adventures. She was running on fumes by 5 o'clock, droopy-eyed and clingy, wanting to be held. Emma carried her on one hip while she figured out dinner, which was going to be a problem, because her planned groceries were in the trunk and consisted of things she could make with one hand while holding a child. Pasta, jarred sauce, the kind of pre-cut vegetables that said "I'm trying" without requiring any actual culinary skill. She was staring into the open fridge, his fridge, stocked with actual ingredients, the kind of food a person bought when they knew how to cook, when Bear came in from the workshop. He'd showered. She could tell because his hair was damp and he smelled different, still pine, still cedar, but fresher, warmer, with something underneath that was just skin. Clean male skin. She hadn't smelled clean male skin in a long time. Long enough that the scent of it hit her like a physical thing, a warm hand pressing against her lower belly. She closed the fridge too fast. "I was going to make pasta," she said, holding up the box of penne like evidence at a trial. "For us. Me and Lily. I wasn't presuming. You have your dinner times, I know, I'll just—" "It's stupid to cook separately," he said. She stopped. "What?" "One kitchen. 2 people cooking 2 meals. It's inefficient." He said inefficient like it was a moral failing. "I was going to make stew. There's enough for 3. You don't have to." "I'm making stew, Emma. Sit down." She sat down. Partly because he'd told her to in a voice that didn't invite discussion, and partly because Lily was getting heavier by the minute and her arm was going numb, and the idea of someone else cooking dinner, of just sitting while someone else handled it, was so foreign and so seductive that her knees went soft. She sat at the kitchen table with Lily on her lap and watched Bear cook. It was something. Watching him move in the kitchen. He was too big for the space in the same way he was too big for most spaces, but he moved through it with an ease that said he'd memorized the choreography. The reach for the cutting board. The pull of the knife from the block. The way he held an onion in one massive hand, and diced it with a speed and precision that made her think about what else those hands could do with that kind of control. She thought about it. She thought about it longer than was appropriate. Then she thought about it some more, because Lily was falling asleep on her chest and couldn't see her face, and there was nobody else here to witness the slow flush climbing her neck. "You can cook," she said, because silence was dangerous. "I can feed myself." "There's a difference." You just brunoised an onion. That's not feeding yourself, that's actual technique." He glanced at her over his shoulder. "You know what a brunoise is?" "I used to plan events. Corporate dinners, galas, weddings. I spent a lot of time in kitchens." She paused. "Before?" He didn't ask before what. He turned back to the stove and said, "What happened?" The question was so direct, so stripped of the careful hedging other people used. "If you don't mind my asking, you don't have to answer. I hope this isn't too personal," that it surprised an honest answer out of her. "Lily happened. Her dad left when she was 6 months old. I couldn't do 60-hour event weeks with a baby and no partner, so I quit and went remote." She shrugged, even though he wasn't looking. "Virtual assistant. Less money. Flexible hours. It works." "Does it?" "It pays rent." "That's not what I asked." She looked at the back of his head, the dark hair curling at his nape, still damp from the shower, and felt a spike of irritation that was also underneath a spike of something warmer. Nobody asked her if things worked. People asked if she was managing. If she was okay. If she needed anything. Safe questions with safe answers. "Does it work?" was not a safe question. "It's what I have," she said. He was quiet for a long time after that. Stirred the stew. Added something from a jar. The kitchen filled with the smell of rosemary and beef and warmth, and Lily slept on Emma's chest, and the fire crackled, and for a few minutes the only sound was the stove and the storm, and the breathing of two people who didn't know how to talk to each other yet but were trying. "The commission I'm working on," he said eventually. "Bookshelves. For a couple in Bozeman. They've been going back and forth on the design for 3 months. He wants modern. She wants rustic. I told them I'd build what looked right, and they could fight about it when it was done." Emma laughed. A real laugh, short, surprised, rusty from disuse. "And they went for that?" "Paid the deposit." People don't actually want to make decisions. They want someone to make decisions for them, and then either agree or blame. That's bleak. That's carpentry. She laughed again. Softer this time, but real, and she saw his shoulders shift, a micro-relaxation, a loosening she might not have caught if she hadn't been watching him so closely. He liked making her laugh. He'd never admit it, probably didn't even know it yet, but something in him eased when she made that sound. "Don't notice that," she told herself. "Don't you dare notice that." Dinner was good. Better than good. The stew was rich and deep and tasted like someone had cared about making it, which was such a novel concept that Emma had to blink hard over her bowl. She'd put Lily to bed first. The kid barely woke during the transfer, just mumbled something about Rex and rolled over, and come back to find Bear had set 2 places at the table. 2 places. 2 bowls. 2 glasses of water. Like it was normal. Like they did this. They ate in a silence that started awkward and settled into something almost comfortable. The fire did most of the talking. The stew did the rest. "This is really good," she said, halfway through her second bowl, because she'd stopped pretending she wasn't going to eat a second bowl. "It's stew. It's really good stew. I live on frozen meals and whatever Lily doesn't finish. This is..." She gestured at her bowl. "This is food someone made on purpose." He looked at her. The firelight caught his face at an angle that turned his features into something carved. The hard line of his jaw, the straight nose, the deep-set eyes that were definitely brown she could see now, a dark, warm brown with flecks of gold near the pupil that she should not have been close enough to catalog. "You should eat better," he said. "I eat fine." You eat like someone who forgot they matter." The words landed in the kitchen like a slap, and Emma's fork stopped halfway to her mouth because no one had ever said that to her. Not like that. Not with that blunt, unvarnished directness that made it sound less like a judgment and more like a diagnosis. She didn't know what to say. She put her fork down. That's a hell of a thing to say to someone over stew. It's a hell of a way to live. They looked at each other across the table. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind threw itself against the cabin like it was trying to get in. "You don't know me," she said. Quiet. Not angry. Just careful. "I know you drove 6 hours through a blizzard with a kid in the back seat and a car that sounds like it's dying and not enough groceries for a week. I know you've been up since 6 both mornings, working a job that doesn't pay you what you're worth while your daughter plays with my dog. I know you said thank you 4 times yesterday for things that didn't warrant thanking." He paused. "I don't know you. But I'm paying attention." Emma's throat closed. She picked up her fork. Put it down again. Picked up her water glass and drank because she needed something to do with her hands that wasn't reaching across the table. "Why?" she asked. He frowned. "Why what? Why are you paying attention?" The question sat between them. Bear looked at her for a long moment, long enough that she felt it on her skin, a physical thing, the weight of his focus, and then he looked away. Down at his bowl. At the table. At the fire. Anywhere but her. "Stew's getting cold," he said. They finished dinner. She washed the dishes because she needed to contribute something, and because standing at the sink with her back to him felt safer than sitting across the table where he could look at her and say things like "you eat like someone who forgot they matter." He dried. They worked in silence, passing plates and bowls, their fingers almost touching on the wet porcelain and then not touching, the almost more charged than the contact would have been. After, they drifted to the main room. The fire was low but still warm. The couch was large, oversized, built for a man his size, and they sat at opposite ends with enough space between them for a whole additional person. A chaperone. A buffer zone. Emma pulled her knees up. Bear stretched his arm along the back of the couch, not toward her, just there. The cabin settled around them. Rex snored by the fire. Down the hall, Lily was silent, sleeping hard. They talked. Small things at first, the storm, the forecast, whether the plow would make it up the mountain this week. Then bigger things. She told him about Lily's obsession with dinosaurs, and how she'd had to watch the same documentary about T-Rexes 47 times. He told her that Rex had eaten an entire Thanksgiving turkey off the counter last year, and hadn't even looked guilty about it. She laughed. He almost smiled. The space between them on the couch felt like it was vibrating. "I should go to bed," she said, at some point that might have been 10 o'clock or midnight. Time was doing strange things in this cabin, stretching and compressing in ways that made hours feel like minutes and minutes feel like lifetimes. "Yeah," he said. Neither of them moved. She turned her head to say something, "Good night," probably, or "thank you for dinner," or some other safe packaged phrase that would let her stand up and walk away, and found him looking at her. Not at her face. At her mouth. It was a split-second thing. A flicker of attention, a drop of his gaze from her eyes to her lips that lasted maybe half a heartbeat before he caught himself and looked away. At the fire. At the wall. At anything that wasn't the soft parted shape of her mouth in the low light. But she saw it. And he knew she saw it, because the line of his jaw went tight and his hand on the back of the couch curled into a fist, and he said, "Good night, Emma," in a voice that sounded like he was holding something back with his teeth. She stood. Her legs were unsteady, for reasons that had nothing to do with fatigue. "Good night, Bear." She walked down the hallway to the guest wing. Closed the door. Leaned against it. Pressed her hands flat against the wood and felt her own pulse hammering in her wrists, her throat, the hollow between her collarbones, and lower. A pulse between her legs that she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten what it meant. He'd looked at her mouth. 1 second. Less than a second. A glance that meant nothing, that could have been firelight or tiredness, or the simple mechanics of a man's gaze wandering. But his hand had made a fist. She got into bed beside Lily, pulled the quilt up, stared at the ceiling the way she'd stared at it last night, except last night she'd been thinking about the proximity, and tonight she was thinking about the want, which was different, which was worse, which was a door opening inside her that she'd spent 3 years bricking shut. He'd looked at her mouth and his hand had made a fist, and he'd said good night, like it was a word he had to force past something lodged in his throat. She rolled onto her side, pressed her thighs together against the ache, and felt her face flush hot in the dark. Her body was awake. Her body was wide, screaming, catastrophically awake in a way it hadn't been in years, and it didn't care about booking errors or ground rules or the carefully constructed life she was supposed to go back to. Her body cared about the way his forearms looked when he chopped onions, the way he smelled after a shower, the way he'd said, "I'm paying attention," like it was a threat and a promise at the same time. "Stop," she told herself. "Go to sleep. You're a mother. You're on a couch in a stranger's cabin. This is not a romance novel. This is a logistics problem with a man who owns a very comfortable couch and has a voice like warm gravel and hands that could." She was not finishing that thought. She closed her eyes. Lily murmured in her sleep and pressed closer, one small hand finding Emma's arm the way she always did, and the anchor of it, the weight of her daughter's trust, the reminder of who she was and what she was responsible for, pulled Emma back from the edge. She breathed. She counted. She did not think about his hands. She did not think about his hands. She fell asleep eventually, and if she dreamed about dark eyes and cedar, and the sound of her name in a voice like gravel, she didn't remember it in the morning. She remembered it in the morning. Chapter 4. The Crack. The power went out at 11:14 p.m. Bear knew the exact time because he'd been lying in bed staring at the digital clock on his nightstand, which had read 11:13 for what felt like an hour before it blinked to 11:14 and then blinked off entirely, taking the lamp, the hallway light, and the low hum of the refrigerator with it. Darkness. Total mountain dark, the kind of dark that didn't exist in cities, the kind that pressed against your eyes and made you aware of every sound because sight was no longer an option. Rex lifted his head from the floor. "Power's out," Bear said as if the dog had asked. "Happens in storms. Give it a minute." He gave it 5. The power did not come back. He got up, pulled on a thermal over his boxer briefs, because he wasn't making the shirtless mistake again. He was a man who learned from his errors, or at least this particular error, which had involved Emma Carter's eyes tracking down his bare chest like a scanner and his own brain doing something he'd spent 2 days pretending hadn't happened. He found the flashlight in the kitchen drawer. Checked the breaker panel in the utility closet. The main breaker had tripped, not unusual in a storm this heavy. He flipped it. Nothing. The generator should have kicked on, but the generator was temperamental in cold weather and had a personal vendetta against him that went back to a maintenance appointment he'd skipped in October. The cabin had a fireplace. The guest wing did not have a fireplace. Bear stood in the dark hallway and did the math. The cabin was well insulated, but the guest wing was the oldest part of the structure, original construction, thinner walls, a window that didn't seal properly no matter how many times he recalked it. Without heat, the temperature would drop fast. Not dangerously fast, not for him, but for a woman and a 4-year-old in a room with a drafty window. He went to the side porch, loaded his arms with firewood, 4 logs, 2 pieces of kindling, carried them down the hall to the guest wing. He knocked. Quietly, because the kid might be sleeping. Footsteps. Quick, light, barefoot on hardwood. The door opened. Emma stood in the doorway holding her phone as a flashlight, the pale blue glow lighting her from below in a way that turned her face into something from a painting, shadows under her cheekbones, light in her eyes, her hair loose around her shoulders for the first time since she'd arrived. She was wearing the sleep shirt. The same thin gray one. The phone light did not do him any favors, because it illuminated her in a way the kitchen light hadn't. The shirt was old, worn, soft, and the cold had done things to the fabric that he was going to have to live with for the rest of his natural life. He could see the shape of her. Not just the outline, the shape. The curve of her waist tapering from her ribs. The swell of her hips where the shirt skimmed them. The shadow of her navel through the cotton. And higher, the full soft weight of her breasts unbound, the fabric clinging to them in a way that made it graphically clear she was wearing nothing underneath. Her nipples were hard from the cold. He knew that, because they were pressed against the shirt like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence he was not equipped to read right now. Bear looked at the wall behind her head. The doorframe. The floor. Anything that was not Emma Carter's chest in a sleep shirt in the dark. "Power's out," he said. His voice sounded like he'd been gargling gravel. "I noticed." She was hugging herself, arms crossed over her chest, which suggested she'd noticed him noticing, which meant they were both now aware of the noticing, which made the hallway approximately 900 degrees despite the dropping temperature. "Brought firewood. Your wing doesn't have a fireplace, but the main room does. I'll get it going. You and the kid should sleep out there tonight. It'll be the warmest room in the house." "You don't have to." "Emma." He said her name and she stopped talking. He didn't know when her name had become a tool he could use like that, a single word that cut through her automatic objections and landed somewhere in her chest that made her go still. "The temperature's going to drop to 40 in here by morning. Take the kid. Main room. I'll handle the fire." She nodded. Her eyes were very dark in the phone light, and she was looking at him with an expression that was some combination of gratitude and something else, something warmer and more dangerous that he didn't have a name for and didn't want one. He turned away before his body could do something his brain would regret, and went to build a fire. The main room fireplace was big, river stone, deep enough to hold logs the length of his forearm, with a proper flue that drew well even in wind. He built the fire the way his father had taught him, kindling first a teepee of small sticks, then the logs on top, layered so the air could circulate. The flame caught fast. Within minutes the room was warming, the fire throwing orange light across the walls and ceiling, and the leather couch and Rex, who had materialized from somewhere and claimed the spot closest to the hearth like a furry, opportunistic heat-seeking missile. Emma appeared with Lily. The kid was half asleep, draped over Emma's shoulder like a rag doll, blanket trailing behind them. Emma had put on a sweatshirt over the sleep shirt, thank Christ, but her legs were still bare, and the firelight did things to them that the hallway darkness hadn't, painting her calves and thighs in gold and shadow. He'd pulled extra blankets from the closet. Pillows from his own bed. He arranged them on the wide couch without looking at her because if he looked at her right now, bare-legged, fire-lit, holding her sleeping daughter with a tenderness that made his ribs feel too tight for his lungs, he was going to do something irrevocable. "Here." He gestured at the couch. "Should be warm enough." She laid Lily down. Tucked the blanket around her. Brushed the hair from her daughter's forehead with a touch so gentle it hurt to watch. Lily murmured something unintelligible, and burrowed deeper into the cushions, her hand finding Mr. Bunny with the same unconscious precision Bear had noticed before. The kid navigated sleep the way she navigated everything, with absolute certainty that the things she needed would be where she left them. Emma straightened up. Looked at the fire. Looked at him. "Thank you," she said. "Stop thanking me. Stop doing things worth thanking you for." The corner of his mouth twitched. He killed it. Fire should last till morning. If it burns down, there's more wood on the side porch. Don't try to carry it. You'll throw out my back. Yes. You mentioned. I mentioned. They stood on opposite sides of the fireplace, the sleeping child between them, and the fire crackled and Rex snored and the cabin was the warmest it had been in 2 days, and neither of them moved toward the hallway. Bear should go to bed. He knew this. His room was at the other end of the cabin. He had a door that closed. He could close it and lie in the dark and listen to the storm and not think about her legs. He should go to bed. I'm not going to be able to sleep, Emma said quietly, like she was confessing something. When the power goes out like this, She shook her head. I'm a control person. I need the systems to be running. I need the lights to work and the heat to be on, and the Wi-Fi to function. When things go dark, my brain just... She made a spinning gesture near her temple. Goes into overdrive, he said. She looked at him. Yeah. Exactly. He should go to bed. Instead, he sat down in the armchair by the fire and said, I've got nowhere to be. It was the closest he could come to an invitation. The closest his vocabulary allowed. He didn't say, sit down, talk to me, let me listen. He said, I've got nowhere to be, which meant the same thing in a language he could survive speaking. She sat. Not on the couch, Lily was spread across it like a starfish, but on the floor in front of the fire, legs tucked to one side, the sweatshirt pulled over her knees. She looked small down there. Smaller than she was. Like the firelight had reduced her to the essential version of herself, the tired one, the real one, the one that existed underneath the competence and the okays and the relentless forward motion. They were quiet for a while. The fire talked. The wind talked. The cabin settled and creaked in the way old buildings did when the temperature swung, like an old man adjusting in his chair. Can I ask you something? She said. Depends on the something. Your wife. Ex-wife. Claire. She said the name carefully, like handling a piece of glass she wasn't sure was broken. You said you wanted different things. Was that really all it was? Bear leaned back in the chair. Stared at the fire. The honest answer was complicated, and he didn't do complicated well, but something about the dark and the fire and the hour and the woman on the floor made him want to try. Claire wanted a life that made sense, he said. Timeline. House. Kids by 35. Career, promotions, dinner parties with other couples who had the same timeline. She had it mapped out. Color-coded, probably. He paused. I tried to fit into it. For 5 years I tried. Wore the shirts. Went to the dinners. Talked about kitchen renovations with people I didn't know. And every single day, I felt like I was wearing a suit made for a different man. So you left? She left. She just had the good sense to realize it first. He was quiet for a moment. She said I was emotionally unavailable. In the conversation where she told me she was moving out. She said she'd spent 5 years trying to reach me, and I'd spent 5 years standing just out of arm's length. He heard Emma's breathing change. A small catch, like a skipped beat. Was she right? Emma asked. Probably. The word cost him more than it should have. I'm not good at the parts of being with someone that require showing up. The daily stuff. The mundane, every morning, how was your day stuff. I can build a house. I can carry someone off a mountain. I can make stew and fix a router. But the part where you sit across from someone and let them see you. He exhaled through his nose. I don't know how to do that without feeling like I'm handing someone a weapon. The fire popped. A log shifted, sending a spray of sparks up the flue. Rex adjusted, yawned, settled. You're doing it right now, Emma said. He looked at her. She was looking up at him from the floor, chin resting on her knees, and her face in the firelight was open in a way that made his chest constrict. Not pitying. Not analyzing. Just open. Like she was receiving what he was giving and holding it carefully, and not planning to use it against him. He didn't know what to do with that. Your turn, he said. Deflection. His native tongue. She smiled, a half smile, wry, like she knew exactly what he was doing and was going to let him do it anyway. What do you want to know? The ex. Lily's father. You said he left when she was 6 months old. Jason. She said the name with less care than she'd given Claire's, like it was a word she'd worn the edges off through overuse. Jason was fun. That was his whole thing. He was fun and spontaneous, and he made everything feel like an adventure. And then Lily came, and suddenly everything was real, and real wasn't fun, and Jason didn't know how to be anything that wasn't fun. He left because it wasn't fun? He left because he woke up one morning and realized that being a father meant waking up every morning, and he didn't want to do that. So he packed a bag and said he needed space to figure out who he was. She laughed, a short, hard sound with no humor in it. He figured out who he was pretty fast. He's in Austin now. New girlfriend. No kids. Posts pictures of himself at music festivals. Bear's jaw tightened. He was aware of a feeling in his hands, a tension, a tightening around the bones, that he recognized as the desire to hit something. Specifically, a man named Jason who'd looked at this woman and this kid and decided they weren't worth waking up for. He sends birthday cards, Emma added, like that was a consolation. When he remembers. Lily got 2 last year, because he couldn't remember if her birthday was in March or April. It's in March? April. He was wrong both times. Bear exhaled. The sound was longer and rougher than he intended, something close to a growl, vibrating in his chest in a way that made Rex lift his head. What? Emma said. Nothing. You just made a sound like you wanted to kill someone. Not kill. Maybe inconvenience severely. She laughed. A real one this time, warm, surprised, rolling out of her like something she'd been keeping in a locked box. It changed her whole face. The tiredness was still there, the dark circles, the lines of chronic stress, but underneath all of it, when she laughed, she was beautiful in a way that wasn't about bone structure or skin or any of the things that beauty usually meant. She was beautiful the way a window was beautiful, when you opened it, and fresh air came in for the first time in months. He was staring. He was staring and she was looking back, and the fire was low and golden between them, and her laugh had died, but her mouth was still soft with it, still curved, her lips parted on the last breath of the sound she'd made, and he wanted. He wanted. That was the whole of it. He wanted, in a way he hadn't let himself want in 3 years. Not just her body, though God yes, her body, the memory of her in that sleep shirt was a permanent fixture in his brain now, but her. The laugh. The competence. The way she cut Lily's pancakes into even pieces, and handled impossible clients, and drove 6 hours through a blizzard because she'd decided her daughter deserved a vacation, even if it cost her savings she shouldn't have touched. He wanted to be the kind of man who could sit across from a woman like that, and not feel like he was reaching for something he'd break. I should sleep, Emma said. Her voice had gone soft. Careful. Like she'd seen something in his face, and wasn't sure yet if she should acknowledge it. Yeah. He didn't move. She unfolded from the floor. Slowly, her legs were stiff from sitting, and she winced when her knee popped, and she braced her hand on the hearthstones to push herself up. She rose, swayed slightly, and he saw it before it happened, the edge of the rug catching her bare foot, her weight shifting wrong, her hand reaching for something that wasn't there. He was out of the chair before he made the decision to move. His hands found her waist. Both hands. Wrapping around her with an ease that should have alarmed him. How naturally his fingers fit against the curve of her, how his palms covered the span from her ribcage to her hip like they'd been measured for exactly this purpose. She caught herself against his chest. Both her hands flat against his sternum, fingers spread, and he could feel her heartbeat through her palms, fast, too fast, a rapid pulse that had nothing to do with stumbling, and everything to do with the fact that his hands were on her body. She was warm. Through the sweatshirt, through the sleep shirt underneath, she was warm the way living things were warm, the way fires were warm, and his hands tightened on her waist without permission, his fingers pressing into the soft give of her body, and his brain screamed at him to let go while every other part of him refused. She was close. Her face was inches from his chest, tilted up, and from this distance he could see everything. The flecks in her dark eyes, the faint freckles across her nose she probably didn't know about, the shape of her mouth, the lower lip slightly fuller than the upper, slightly parted, and the small sharp intake of breath she took when she realized how close they were. He could feel her breathing. Each exhale hit the base of his throat like a touch. Her hands were still on his chest, not pushing, not pulling, just there, and her fingers curled, minutely, involuntarily, her nails dragging against his thermal with a friction he felt in his spine. The fire crackled. Lily shifted on the couch behind them. Rex's tail thumped once against the floor. Bear's hands were on this woman's waist and her body was pressed against his, and he was hard, not fully, not yet, but getting there, the blood moving south with the single-minded inevitability of a river finding its course, and if she shifted 6 inches to the left she would know, and if she knew, this ceasefire was over. She looked up at him. Her eyes were enormous. Her pulse was visible in her throat, a flutter under the skin that he wanted to press his mouth against, to taste, to feel her heartbeat with his lips. He let go. It was the hardest thing he'd done in recent memory, and his recent memory included pulling a 200-pound man out of a ravine in a snowstorm. His hands released her waist like they were on a timer, fingers uncurling, palms lifting away from her warmth, and the loss of contact was a physical pain, a cold that rushed in where her body had been. He stepped back. "Good night, Emma." His voice was wrecked. He heard it and couldn't fix it, the hoarseness, the roughness, the sound of a man holding himself in check with nothing but stubbornness, and the knowledge that there was a sleeping child 10 feet away. She stood where he'd left her. Her hands were still raised, fingers slightly curled, like she was holding the ghost of his chest. Her breathing was audible. Her cheeks were flushed, and it wasn't from the fire. "Good night, Bear," she said, and her voice was a match for his, unsteady, scraped raw, the voice of a woman who'd just discovered that the door she thought she'd welded shut wasn't just cracked. It was open. He walked to his room, closed the door, stood in the dark with his back against it, and his hands in fists at his sides, and his body making demands his conscience wasn't prepared to negotiate with. He could still feel her. The imprint of her waist under his palms, the specific geometry of her ribcage, the heat of her through 2 layers of fabric. He could still smell her, his soap on her skin, which was a thing he was going to have to deal with, the knowledge that she smelled like him, like she'd been wrapped in his scent, like she belonged in his space. His cock was hard. Fully aching, pressed against his boxer briefs, with a dull insistence that wasn't going away on its own. He thought about dealing with it. His hand, the shower, the efficient, joyless solution of a man who'd been alone long enough to have stopped pretending it was anything other than maintenance. He didn't. Because he knew whose face he'd see, whose body he'd imagine, whose sounds he'd construct from the raw material of 2 days of proximity and 1 sleep shirt, and the curl of her fingers against his chest. And if he let himself go there, if he let his hand wrap around himself while he thought about Emma Carter, he'd cross a line he couldn't uncross. He lay in bed, stared at the dark where the ceiling was. Rex padded in and lay on the floor with a sigh that communicated, clearly and without ambiguity, that his owner was an idiot. On the other side of the cabin, in the glow of a dying fire, a woman lay on his couch with her daughter and pressed her face into a pillow that smelled like cedar and pine, and thought about the way his hands had felt on her waist. She was certain of this the way she was certain of gravity, because he'd felt her think it, felt it in the curl of her fingers and the catch of her breath, and knowing she was lying there feeling what he was feeling was worse than anything. Because it meant this wasn't one-sided. It meant this was a fuse. And fuses, in Bear's experience, did only one thing. He closed his eyes. He did not sleep. Chapter 5. First Cross. The problem with routines was that they became real. Emma had built this one out of necessity. The scaffolding of shared meals and parallel schedules and carefully maintained distance that made it possible to live in a stranger's cabin without losing her mind. But somewhere around day 4, the scaffolding had stopped being scaffolding and started being a house, and now she was standing inside it looking at the walls and thinking, this feels like mine. It wasn't hers. None of it was hers. Not the cabin, not the kitchen, not the man in the kitchen, not the life that the 3 of them, 4 counting Rex, had started building without anyone acknowledging they were building it. By day 5, the routine had calcified into something that looked dangerously like a life. It went like this. 6 a.m. Bear's coffee was already made. Her mug was on the counter, the blue one with the chipped handle, which she'd used the first morning and which had now become her mug in the way that things became yours when someone set them out for you without being asked. The coffee was ready, black for him, splash of milk for her, and she hadn't told him how she took it. He just watched her make it once and remembered, the way he remembered things, silently, without comment, filed away and deployed as though knowing how she took her coffee was a structural detail as important as the grade of the wood or the angle of a joint. 6:15. Lily appeared. Rex appeared. They merged into a single entity of fur and giggles and chaos, and the kitchen filled with the sound of a child's voice and a dog's tail hitting the cabinet, and the low, rumbling monosyllables of a man who'd given up pretending he wasn't charmed. 7. Breakfast. Bear cooked. He'd stopped pretending it was accidental. No more I made me pancakes, she was here, there's extra. He just made enough for 3. Sometimes he made things Lily had mentioned liking. Scrambled eggs because she'd talked about eggs, toast with peanut butter because she'd asked if he had any, fruit cut into pieces so small they could only have been done by a man who was thinking about the size of a 4-year-old's mouth. He never said anything about it. Just set the plate down. That was the thing about Bear Morrison. He didn't announce. He just did. The router, the firewood, the coffee, the food. Acts of service delivered without fanfare or expectation, like a man who'd decided that the most efficient way to care about someone was to never mention it. It was killing her. 8 a.m. Lily and Rex went outside. Emma worked. Bear went to the workshop. The hours between 8 and noon were the safe hours, separate, parallel, the sound of his sander drifting through the window like white noise while she answered Darlene's emails and pretended her chest didn't do something every time she caught a glimpse of him through the glass. Noon. Lunch. Sometimes together, sometimes not, depending on whether Bear emerged from the workshop or stayed buried in sawdust and silence. Afternoon. Lily napped or didn't. Emma worked or didn't. Bear built things. The cabin existed around them like a snow globe, contained, suspended, outside of time. Evening. Dinner. Together. This was no longer negotiable. They'd stopped discussing it after the 3rd night. He cooked or she cooked, or they cooked at the same time in the same kitchen, moving around each other with an awareness that was both hypervigilant and increasingly fluid, like 2 dancers learning the same choreography from opposite ends of the stage. After dinner. Lily's bedtime. The routine within the routine, bath, teeth, pajamas story. The story had become Bear's job, and Emma couldn't even remember when that had happened. One night Lily had asked, and Bear had said yes like it was nothing, like reading Goodnight Moon to a 4-year-old in a voice that could rumble through concrete, was just another item on his evening checklist. And every night Emma stood in the hallway and listened to that voice, low, steady, patient in a way that undid her, and thought, I am in so much trouble. After the story. After Lily slept. That was when the real night began. The hours between Lily's bedtime and their own were the dangerous hours. The hours when the cabin shrank, when the fire got low, when they ended up in the same room with nothing between them but air and the increasingly transparent pretense that they were strangers waiting out a storm. They talked. They'd talked every night since the fire conversation, the night he'd caught her, the night his hands had been on her waist and she'd felt the shape of his chest under her palms, and he'd said goodnight like the word was a wall he was building between them with his bare hands. They talked about everything and nothing. He told her about the workshop, about the way wood grain had a logic to it that people didn't. She told him about event planning, about the chaos of wedding receptions and the particular madness of a bride who changed her color scheme 3 days before the ceremony. He told her Rex had once eaten an entire pie off a windowsill like a cartoon dog. She told him Lily had asked a mall Santa for a pet dinosaur and been genuinely confused when Christmas morning didn't deliver. They made each other laugh. She'd learned his laugh by now, rare, short, a low sound in his chest that he seemed surprised by every time, like he'd forgotten his body could do that. She was collecting those laughs the way Lily collected rocks, and for roughly the same reason, because they were precious and she wanted to keep them. And every night, at some point, the talking would slow. The fire would get low. The silence would thicken. And one of them would say good night, and the other would echo it, and they'd go to their separate rooms and lie in their separate beds and not sleep. 5 days. 5 days of this, and Emma was vibrating at a frequency she hadn't known her body could sustain. Day 5 was a normal day. Aggressively, determinedly normal. Breakfast. Work. Lily and Rex. Lunch. The afternoon passed in the gray-white haze of a storm that had downgraded from violent to merely persistent, the snow still falling but softer now, the wind eased to a murmur. Bear spent the day in the workshop. Emma caught herself at the window twice, 3 times, 4 times, watching him through the glass. He was shaping something on the lathe, his body in profile, the focus on his face so complete it was like watching someone pray. His hands moved over the wood with a sureness that made her throat tight, and she stood at the window and watched those hands and thought about them on her waist, the weight and span of them, the way his fingers had pressed into the soft give of her body like he was testing what she felt like, and each time she caught herself, she stepped away from the window and went back to her laptop and told herself to stop. She did not stop. Dinner was stew again. He'd made a big batch and it was better the second day, deeper, the flavors settled. Lily ate enthusiastically and told a 20-minute story about a squirrel she'd seen from the window that was, by her account, probably a spy. Bear listened with the grave attention he gave all of Lily's stories, asking follow-up questions. What was the squirrel spying on? Did it have accomplices? That sent Lily into fits of delighted elaboration. Emma watched this man interrogate a 4-year-old about squirrel espionage, and felt the last bolt in her defenses shear clean off. Bedtime. Bath. Teeth. Bear read Goodnight Moon. Emma stood in the hallway, and pressed her back against the wall and closed her eyes and listened to his voice say goodnight stars, goodnight air, goodnight noises everywhere, and felt it move through her body like a hand. Lily slept. The cabin went quiet. Emma changed out of her sweatshirt into a long-sleeved Henley that was thin enough to regret but thick enough to justify. She did not examine this choice. She brushed her hair, which she hadn't done at night since she'd been here, which she was also not examining, and left the guest wing. The main room was empty. Fire burning low. Rex on his bed. Bear's coffee mug was on the counter, rinsed, and his boots were gone from the rack by the door. She found him on the back porch. He was leaning against the railing, coatless despite the cold, his breath making clouds in the air. The snow had stopped for the first time in days, and the sky was cracked open, stars everywhere, more stars than she'd ever seen, a violent spill of light across the black that made the mountain and the trees look like a painting someone had knocked the frame off of. He didn't turn when she opened the door, but his shoulders shifted, a micro-adjustment, a tightening that said he knew she was there, that he'd probably known she was coming, that the last 5 nights had established a pattern neither of them had agreed to and neither could break. She'd brought coffee. 2 mugs. His was black. "Thought you might want this," she said, holding it out. He took it. Their fingers didn't touch. They were both very careful about that now. "Thanks?" She leaned against the railing beside him. Not close, 2 feet of careful, responsible adult distance. The cold was sharp and clean and tasted like pine, and she could see her breath and his breath making separate clouds that drifted together in the dark before dissolving. "Stars are out," she said. "First time this week." "It's beautiful." "It's cold. You should go inside." "I'm fine." "You're shivering." She was, and not entirely from the cold. "I'm fine, Bear." The way she said his name, she heard it, the shape of it in her mouth, softer than she'd intended, lower, the kind of voice you used in the dark when you wanted someone to hear something other than the words. She hadn't meant to say it like that. But the night and the stars and the cold and 5 days of wanting had worn her down to something honest, and his name came out sounding like what it was, a confession. He heard it. She knew because his hand tightened on the mug. Because his jaw went rigid, the muscle in his cheek flexing under the beard. Because he inhaled, slow, deliberate, controlled, in the way of a man who was managing something volatile. "Emma." Her name in his mouth. Low. Rough. A warning. I know, she said. She didn't know what she was acknowledging. The danger, the stupidity, the fact that she was standing on a frozen porch with a man she'd known for 5 days feeling more alive than she'd felt in 3 years. All of it. I know. Silence. The stars burned. The cold pressed in. 2 feet of distance that might as well have been 2 inches for all the good it was doing. You should go inside, he said again, but the words had changed. They were heavier now, weighed down with something that wasn't concern about her body temperature. He was looking straight ahead, at the tree line, at the dark, at anything that wasn't her. What if I don't want to go inside? He set his mug on the railing. The click of ceramic on wood was loud in the silence, deliberate, final, the sound of a man putting something down so his hands would be free. He turned to face her. The starlight was enough. Enough to see his face, the hard planes and dark eyes and the expression he was wearing, which wasn't anger and wasn't patience and wasn't any of the careful, controlled things she'd seen him wear for 5 days. It was decision. It was resignation. It was the look of a man who'd been running a cost-benefit analysis in his head for a week and had just arrived at a number he was willing to pay. If you don't go inside, he said, his voice like gravel wrapped in smoke, I'm going to kiss you. The words landed on her skin like a lit match. Her heart slammed against her sternum once hard, so hard she felt it in her teeth, and the 2 feet between them became a living thing, a charged space, a dare. And if I stay, she whispered. He moved. 1 step. That was all it took. 1 step and the 2 feet were gone and he was there, in her space, his body blocking the wind and the cold and the stars and everything else, and she had to tilt her head back to look at him because he was so goddamn tall, so goddamn big, and his face was inches from hers, and his eyes were black in the starlight, and he was looking at her like she was the only thing left in the world. His hand came up. Slow. She watched it, the massive span of it, the calloused fingers, the deliberate way he moved like he was giving her every chance to run. His palm cupped her jaw. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. His hand was rough and warm and so large it cradled the entire side of her face, and the touch sent a bolt of electricity from her jaw to her belly, to the space between her legs that clenched so hard she gasped. Tell me to stop, he said, and his voice was barely a voice, it was a vibration, a tremor in the air between their mouths. She grabbed the front of his shirt with both fists and pulled. His mouth hit hers and the world ended. Not gently. Not the tentative, questioning first kiss of 2 people testing the water. This was the dam breaking. This was 5 days of proximity and restraint and loaded silences, and his hands on her waist and her fingers on his chest, and every look, every almost, every good night that meant I want you crashing through the wall they'd built and flooding everything. He kissed her like he was starving. His hand fisted in her hair, the hair she'd brushed, she'd known, some part of her had known this was coming, and tilted her head back, angling her mouth under his, and his other hand found her hip and gripped it hard enough that she felt each individual finger pressing into her through the thin fabric of her leggings. She gasped against his mouth and he swallowed the sound. His tongue traced the seam of her lips and she opened for him, opened like unlocking, opened like she'd been closed for years and his mouth was the key. And when his tongue slid against hers, the sound she made was not quiet and not dignified, and not anything a responsible single mother should be making on a frozen porch at 11 o'clock at night. She didn't care. Her hands released his shirt and went up into his hair, which was thick and coarse and exactly the right length for her fingers to grip, and she pulled him closer, pulled him down, and he made a sound against her mouth that she felt in her chest. Low, rough, almost pained. The sound of a man who'd been holding something back and had just lost his grip on it. He walked her backward. 2 steps, 3, and her back hit the porch railing and his body pressed against hers, all of him, the full length and weight and heat of him, and she felt what she'd almost felt that night by the fire. Hard. Thick. Pressed against her lower belly through his jeans, unmistakable, and the knowledge of what that meant, what she was doing to him, sent a flood of heat between her thighs so sudden it made her dizzy. His mouth left hers. Traveled down her jaw, along the line of her neck, his beard rough against her skin in a way that was going to leave marks she'd have to hide tomorrow. He found the spot below her ear and his teeth grazed it, and she arched against him, her hips pressing forward, finding him, grinding against the hard ridge of him through too many layers of fabric, and the sound that came out of her mouth was something between a moan and his name. There. His hand tightened in her hair. His mouth was at her throat, his breath hot against her pulse, and she could feel his chest heaving against hers, could feel his restraint fraying in real time, the fine motor tremor in his hands, the way his hips pressed back against hers in a single involuntary thrust that made them both groan. His other hand slid from her hip to the small of her back, pulled her tighter against him. She could feel every inch of him now, the rigid length of his cock pressed against her belly, the heat of it radiating through denim, and she wanted, God, she wanted, to reach down and touch him, to feel the shape and size of what had been pressing against her and confirm what her body already knew, that he was big everywhere, that the man who filled doorways and dwarfed kitchen counters would fill her in a way that... He broke the kiss. Pulled back. Not far, his forehead against hers, their breath tangling in the cold air between their mouths, his hands still on her. In her hair. On her back. Holding her against him while he shook. He was shaking. This enormous, controlled, unshakable man was shaking against her, and his eyes were closed and his jaw was clenched and his breathing was ragged, and she could feel his heartbeat through his chest, hammering wild, the heartbeat of a man who just lost a fight he'd been winning for 5 days. That, he said, his voice wrecked, barely human, can't happen again. She stared at him. His forehead was still against hers. His eyes were still closed. His hand was still in her hair, and his body was still pressed against hers, and the statement was so profoundly contradicted by every physical fact of the moment that she almost laughed. Almost. But the look on his face stopped her, the strain, the war, the genuine anguish of a man trying to do the right thing while every cell in his body was screaming at him to do the other thing. He let go of her, untangled his hand from her hair, removed his palm from her back, stepped away, and the cold rushed into the space between them like water filling a wound. He didn't look at her. He picked up his coffee mug from the railing, the coffee long cold, and walked inside. The door closed behind him with a soft, precise click that was worse than a slam. Emma stood on the porch. Her lips were swollen. Her skin was flushed, hot despite the cold, and her body was humming at a frequency that made standing difficult. Her hair was wrecked. Her leggings were, she could feel it, the slick heat between her thighs, the physical evidence of how thoroughly that kiss had undone her. She was wet. Soaked. From a kiss. From a kiss and the press of his body, and the rough tender way he'd held her head and the sound he'd made when she'd ground against him. She pressed her fingers to her lips. They were tender. Sensitive. She could feel where his beard had scraped the skin around her mouth, could feel the ghost of his tongue against hers, could still taste him, coffee and something darker, something that was just him, and she pressed her fingers harder against her mouth and closed her eyes and stood in the cold and the starlight and shook. That can't happen again. She went inside. Down the hallway. Past the main room where the fire had burned to embers and Rex was snoring, and the door to Bear's room was closed, definitively closed. She checked on Lily. Sleeping. Peaceful. Unaware that her mother had just been kissed stupid on a porch by a man whose name was a species of animal, and whose hands could cover her entire waist, and whose cock had been pressed against her belly hard enough to feel through denim. She went to the bathroom. Closed the door. Leaned against it. Her reflection in the mirror was a woman she barely recognized. Flushed. Bright-eyed. Lips red and swollen and slightly raw from his beard. A mark below her ear, not a hickey, not quite, but a redness, a brand, where his teeth had grazed her. Her hair was a disaster, finger-raked and wild, and there was color in her cheeks that had nothing to do with cold, and everything to do with the fact that her body was still there, still on that porch, still pressed against a railing with 230 pounds of man grinding against her. She looked alive. She looked awake. For the first time in years, the woman in the mirror looked like someone who existed below the neck. She splashed water on her face. Brushed her teeth. Went to bed. Lay beside Lily in the dark and stared at the ceiling and felt her heartbeat everywhere, her chest, her throat, her wrists, between her legs, a persistent throbbing pulse that didn't care about ground rules or booking errors or the practical impossibility of what she was feeling. That can't happen again. She pressed her thighs together under the quilt. It didn't help. Nothing was going to help. She was 30 years old and she'd been touched for the first time in 2 years, and her body was not going to let her forget it, not tonight, maybe not ever. She thought about his hand in her hair. The way he'd tilted her head back like he was positioning her, like he knew the exact angle he wanted and took it. She thought about the sound he'd made, that low, rough, almost pained sound that had vibrated against her lips. She thought about his cock, hard against her belly, and the single thrust of his hips that had been involuntary, uncontrolled, a moment where his body had overruled his brain. She thought about what would have happened if he hadn't stopped. If his hand had slid from her back to her ass. If he'd lifted her, he could have, easily, one-handed, and she'd wrapped her legs around him. If he'd carried her inside, carried her to his bed, laid her down and climbed over her, and put his mouth on the places his hands hadn't reached yet. If she'd gotten to find out whether the rest of him matched the promise of what she'd felt through his jeans. She was wet again. Still. More. Her hand drifted under the quilt to the waistband of her leggings, and she thought about it, about sliding her fingers down and touching herself, and letting the pressure build and break while she thought about his mouth on her neck and his hands in her hair and his body against hers. She didn't. Lily was right there. And it wouldn't have been enough, anyway. Not anymore. Not after that kiss. Her own hand was never going to be enough again, and that thought, that terrifying, exhilarating thought, was the last one she had before exhaustion finally dragged her under. That can't happen again. Her last conscious thought, curled around her sleeping daughter in a cabin on a mountain in the dark. Yes, it can.
Emma Carter, in the dark. Pressing her thighs together under the quilt, the taste of him still on her swollen lips, the mark of his beard below her ear, her own hand drifting toward the waistband of her leggings, and stopping. Because it won't be enough anymore. Not after that kiss. Yes, it can. Wrong Cabin, Right Daddy by Isla Wilde. The full novel is available now. Link in the description. And if you want the bonus chapter, Bear and Emma's first morning alone after Lily starts school, too hot for Amazon. That link's there too. Thanks for listening. See you next episode.